Real Country 1430 AM and 107.3 FM WRDN. I'm Brian Winnikins from World Dairy Expo, and thank you to our expo sponsors, including AMPI, Seal Plastics, Wisconsin Farmers Union, Credenz Seeds, Andy Grebner, your representative in Northwest Wisconsin, and Anna Silo. And joining us today is Chris Galen, Vice President of Communications with the National Milk Producers Federation. And Chris, thank you for joining us. Well, first, let's talk a little bit about the USMCA. In talking with Secretary Perdue earlier during Expo, he was still pretty confident that the USMCA would get passed. What are you hearing on the Hill? Are we going to see maybe a vote on this, or is everything now locked up due to inquiries, so to speak?
Well, that's the real question, and we won't know the answer until the end of the year. Did they vote on the USMCA or not? Right now, what we've been hearing, at least officially, all the way from the House Speaker on down, is that they want to continue working on other legislative issues besides the possibility of impeaching the president. And we think that if there's any evidence that they can continue to function and work on a bipartisan basis, it will be on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. So I know I speak for all of agriculture, not just dairy, that we need to see this passed. We want to see it done here in 2019 and not have it slip into 2020. So we're just hoping that despite all the heated rhetoric, which is going to get worse before it gets better, frankly, on the issue of the function of the presidency, that in terms of our trade relationship with Mexico and Canada, we need to get the USMCA passed.
Meanwhile, in talking with Secretary Perdue as well during a news conference, I'd asked him about the agreement with Japan and that there had been concerns from National Milk and other really dairy organizations, even Wisconsin Congressman Ron Kind, about we haven't seen anything for dairy. What about dairy? He disagreed. He said there's a lot in it for dairy. Does he know something we don't?
Well, there are some details that have not been publicly finalized, Brian, and so there are still some things that we need to see happen before we can pronounce a final judgment on the deal. What we have told the administration is that we need to continue working on the terms of this agreement with Japan because it is such a large market, and the important thing is that there are other nations that already have relationships with Japan, trade deals and so forth, and the U.S. cannot be placed at a competitive disadvantage with countries like New Zealand, because if that becomes baked in and they have better access than our U.S. farmers have, then that will be a lost opportunity in terms of reaching the Japanese consumer. So we're encouraged by what we've seen so far out of the trade deal. It's a more limited one that was announced here at the end of the summer, but we still need to see some additional work done on the agreement.
Meanwhile, the new dairy margin coverage program, the sign-ups, they've been going pretty well. Is National Milk pleased with it?
Well, we saw the official tally here at the beginning of October. It's about 23,000 farms have enrolled for 2019. I should say about half of those are signed up just for 2019. The other half of the 23,000 are signed up for the full duration of the Farm Bill, which is through 2023. So certainly we're encouraged by that. I think there's always going to be some people that don't want to be involved with the government program, and maybe they just can't be bothered. They weren't all that interested in the benefits of the DMC. But we know that the program is going to pay out just over $300 million just in 2019. And so that's a really encouraging sign, and it shows you the benefits of the DMC compared to the program that it replaced, which was the Margin Protection Program. If we would have still had the MPP in place here in 2019, it would not have paid out a single dollar. So it just shows you that we have a much more robust safety net in place now.
Talking with Chris Galen from National Milk Producers Federation this morning. Had a chance to chat with him during the World Dairy Expo. Chris, there was earlier in the week on Tuesday at Expo after the town hall with Secretary Perdue and the news conference that he had. The story made national news really across the country about comments that the Secretary made about small dairies and big dairies, and can small dairies survive in this economy or in this day and age, or do dairy farmers have to decide to go big or go home? And the comments were really, he was like, this is something that is up to each individual dairy farmer. But I guess from National Milk's perspective, your thoughts on the state of the dairy economy for those smaller dairy farms. Do they really have to go big or go home, or do they just have to use tools that are potentially available for them, or is it just a bridge too far? It's a big challenge for them.
Well, I'm not sure that there's any news that there's consolidation going on in agriculture, not just in dairy. It's true for all commodities, and it's been going on not just for the last 5 or 10 years, but really the last 100 years since the end of the First World War. So that's not necessarily a new development. It's always been a challenge when you have fewer but larger farms every year, and so the key, I think, is for policy organizations like the National Milk Producers, which is who I speak for, to look at those policies that will give farms of all sizes a puncher's chance, a fighter's chance to continue fighting into the future. That's why we work with Congress. We were just talking about the DMC. In the last Farm Bill last year, the best benefits of the Dairy Margin Coverage Program accrue to those farms with 5 million pounds of milk or less. And those would certainly be considered small farms, I think, by any reasonable definition. It's why we're also looking at the trade deals that we were talking about a minute ago, Brian, because those trade deals have positive economic benefits to farms of all sizes. So I think it's just a matter of continuing to look for ways to help all family farms out and to recognize that while there's going to be consolidation, there are some things that we can do here in Washington to help those farmers out who want to stay in business.
Talking with Chris Galen from National Milk Producers Federation. One of the topics that was brought up at that news conference as well was the labor situation, the H-2A program. And the Secretary talked about he's trying to work with the Department of Labor to change some of that. And for dairy, that's kind of a big deal. Is that something that is encouraging for National Milk and for the dairy industry?
Yes, and we are hoping here later in the fall, Brian, to see a new bill formally introduced in the House of Representatives. It's being worked on right now by the chairperson of the House Immigration Subcommittee, and she's been working with farm groups, including National Milk, as well as farm workers organizations, to try to come up with something that will have bipartisan support so at least it can pass the House of Representatives. And the key things for dairy in that, assuming that it comes out the way we hope it will, is that it will create a guest worker program so that we have a reliable future flow of workers, and it will provide legal status for workers who are in this country now who are not documented, and in many cases are working in agriculture and have been for many, many years. So those have been our two primary policy objectives in talking with the House of Representatives folks who are working on this. So we hope to have encouraging news on the policy front very shortly on the immigration policy issue.
Meanwhile, Chris, as well at the town hall meeting that the secretary had, one of the dairy co-ops in western Wisconsin had kind of brought up, and a couple dairy farmers had even brought up the federal milk market program and really how milk is priced with Class 3 and the cheese markets and how it's a very thinly traded market, and USDA maybe should take a look at this, and the secretary is like, wow, this is a pretty complicated thing. But from National Milk's perspective, is that something that maybe we should have Economic Research Service with USDA look at how the milk markets work and how they're traded, especially with, it seems like blocks and barrels really kind of are the driver of everything?
Yeah, well, certainly cheese and the price of cheese underpins the price of the entire milk supply. One of the things that's happened here, though, is that you mentioned blocks and barrels. Typically, there's been a few cents spread in the price of those, and in the last couple of years, that price has sometimes varied as much as 30 cents as opposed to 3 cents, and that's a concern, particularly here in the Midwest, where you do have a pretty robust barrel production sector of the cheese business. So recognizing that there are some disparities there, and that's causing some economic stress for cooperatives and those farmers, we at National Milk have had a cheese pricing task force here in the past year to look at these issues. And it's not just the spread between the blocks and the barrels. In a lot of respects, that's a symptom of larger issues. So the question is, what can be done about it from a policy standpoint, and how much of it just needs to be settled by the economics of the cheese industry. That's something that we're continuing to talk about within our industry. We hope to have a final report on what to do about it here probably in early 2020, and then we can talk with USDA to see if there's some things that we can change about the federal order system or the grading programs or other things that might address some of these concerns that were raised here in Madison this week.
That's Chris Galen. He's with National Milk Producers Federation. We're at World Dairy Expo. I'm Brian Winnikins for Real Country 1430 AM and 107.3 FM WRDN.